The world of medical science was rocked last month by the news that Chinese researchers had, for the first time, produced genetically modified human embryos. Biologists at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou announced that they have engineered the DNA of embryos to modify the gene responsible for producing thalassemia, a life-threatening blood disorder. While medical researchers and doctors use a variety of approaches to treat or prevent disease, few of them are as dramatic as the prospect of editing our genetic code, such that even future generations are affected. Mindful of the controversy that this announcement would incite, the Chinese scientists were quick to reassure the world that the embryos were not viable. That is, the specimens would not have produced a live birth in any case. Nevertheless, ethicists from around the world have responded furiously to this news, with the most significant scientific journals refusing to publish the research and calling for all such experimentation to be stopped. The National Institutes of Health firmly restated its policy that editing the genetic code of humans is, quote, a line that should not be crossed, end quote, and that this remains absolutely ineligible for federal funding in the United States. The emergence of radical new technologies raised difficult moral questions with no easy answers. On the one hand, nearly 8 million children are born each year with a serious birth defect that is at least partly genetic. Can we ethically refuse to pursue treatments that are theoretically within our reach? On the other hand, the possibility of eliminating certain kinds of human bodies from the gene pool raises the specter of eugenics, the organized effort to produce more perfect humans, either by limiting the reproduction of less desirable individuals or encouraging more desirable ones. The practice of eugenics in the mid-20th century was one of the most tragic scandals in the history of medical experimentation, haunting us and guiding our ethical decisions even today. The prospect of designer babies, long the subject matter of science fiction, is ever closer to becoming a reality, and we're tempted to react emotionally rather than thoughtfully at the thought of crafting children in the same way that we custom order designer clothes or furniture. We still remember all too well Nazi Germany's vision of a master race, with the unwanted classes of humanity simply eliminated. In fact, because we can still remember these atrocities so vividly, we're distracted from the more likely scenarios in which we shape the future of humanity, for better or worse. Between the strength of our emotions and our confusion over the meaning of the latest research, it's hard to know where to begin in articulating a Unitarian Universalist response to these controversies. Ever since I was a child, I've been drawn to this world of science fiction, to stories and films describing a futuristic science as wondrous as magic, technologies which are fast becoming a reality today. Most interesting for me in science fiction was the vision its creators presented of our future, often as an allegory for our own society in the present. How will humanity respond to the problems that torment us today? Will we defeat disease and aging? Will we finally choose peace over war? And even more urgent, considering the smoldering protests in Baltimore and Ferguson and elsewhere, what are the social consequences of our vision? Who will enjoy the rewards of our amazing technological progress? And who will be left behind or even eliminated? So often, the future described by my favorite authors, Ray Bradbury and Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov, was a future populated entirely by white people. What does it feel like to view someone else's view of the future and realize that people like you are invisible, or even entirely absent from it. I've read a number of stories in which the future apparently contains no gay or lesbian people, and I have to wonder, when this vision becomes scientifically possible, what will stop us from making it a reality? Considering the ominous possibilities, it's tempting to react with alarm to the news of genetic experimentation, but I believe that our responses will be more meaningful and more useful if we really understand what's at stake and what the most likely risks are. Human genetic engineering is just one part of a trend known as transhumanism, in which we attempt to overcome our biological limitations and the directionless progress of evolution. Biotechnology promises to lengthen our lives, repair our injuries, and protect us from disease, make us stronger, smarter, even more attractive and emotionally healthy. The possibilities seem so limitless as to resemble magic. Increasingly, these promises are becoming a reality, but is it the reality we want? Being a historian, one of the first questions I ponder with challenging topics like this is, in what ways have we already confronted and responded to this issue? Our forebears have imagined escaping or transforming the human condition at least as far back as the Bronze Age, several hundred years before the birth of Jesus. Ancient stories fantasized that we could elude old age and death. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of an herb that grants immortality, and many cultures have stories of a magical fountain of youth. But ancient tales also warned about the misuse of technology to become too much like the gods. For example, when the people of Babel began to build a tower that would have its top in the heavens, God scattered them across the world and left them speaking different languages. And in Greek literature, the fall of Icarus is practically synonymous with hubris, with forgetting our proper place in the world. In Western cultures which have been shaped by these biblical and Greek stories, the rise of ambition in humans is often followed by a humiliating failure, in which we are reminded to remember our limitations. Despite this ambivalence, however, humanity has persisted in developing a variety of technologies to repair or enhance the human person. We've boosted our bodies with mechanical aids, such as walking sticks and crutches, dentures and eyeglasses. We've treated our bodies surgically by extracting or filling decaying teeth, removing an inflamed appendix or tumor, even replacing failing organs. We've regulated our body's processes chemically, using medicines to lower our fevers and relieve our pain, to kill infections, even adjust our psychological health by altering our brain chemistry. There's no question that biotechnology has done so much to lengthen and improve our lives, and these technologies are all familiar enough to seem like reasonable steps. Even though our society is not always accommodating of people using wheelchairs or hearing aids, these technologies at least don't come across as unnatural or threaten our definition of humanity. It's the smart drugs that boost our memory and attention, microscopic robots that swarm throughout our bodies making repairs, and babies genetically designed to excel in sports and languages that leave me feeling like the shape of our future humanity is at stake. The most enthusiastic promoters of transhumanism call this concern hysterical and recall the so-called Luddites of the 19th century who smashed the textile machinery that threatened to replace human workers. At the radical edge of the transhumanist movement are those who don't want their modifications to blend in, but to stand out, enhanced and decorated not merely to be human, but to be superhuman. One flamboyant spokesperson for this faction is the 28-year-old model and performer Victoria Modesta, whose lower left leg was amputated when she was 15. Rather than try to hide her amputation with a standard flesh-colored prosthesis, Modesta flaunts her differences by drawing attention to her leg. Her left leg is covered in sparkling crystals in one scene, flashing lights in another, and a futuristic black spike in another, with no attempt to resemble an ordinary limb at all. She cultivates a Betty Page pin-up sexiness in her videos and considers her unconventionality a weapon against conformity and fascism. For Modesta, body modification is about becoming more than human. The less colorful promoters of transhumanism simply say that we have a moral obligation to do whatever we can to raise the healthiest humans possible, including screening embryos for genetically determined conditions and even modifying their DNA. These advocates aren't arguing for superhuman enhancements or decorations, but life-saving measures, and it's hard to dismiss their arguments. The critics of biotechnology, on the other hand, point to the Chinese genetic research as one reminder of why we need stronger restrictions worldwide. We're tinkering with biology that we still barely understand, and imperfect results nearly always end up killing the subject. But even if an embryo survived these experiments, we can't yet guarantee that a modification to its genetic code might not have repercussions later in its life or for future generations. Other critics look beyond mere practical concerns to the moral values at stake and reject this research as playing God, as indecent and unnatural. I suspect that the most reasonable positions fall somewhere between our two readings this morning, between the divine punishment of Icarus for his arrogance and the rosy optimism of Dennett. Unitarian Universalists are typically guided by more positive attitudes towards science and reason, and these values lead us into even grayer areas between right and wrong. We're guided by a broad range of wisdom literature and moral perspectives, which have helped us articulate our most basic ethical positions. Respect one another, treat others fairly, seek to understand more, build more inclusive community, remember the web of all life. Several years ago, I was invited to participate on a hospital board that helped me deepen my appreciation and my understanding of medical ethics. Any institution that conducts human research has to have what's called an Institutional Review Board, or IRB, to make sure that experimentation is conducted safely and morally. I spent 6 years overseeing medical protocols to make sure that ethical standards were followed. What this practice has helped me to see is that many real-life controversies can't be understood clearly in simple terms of right and wrong, but are better evaluated in terms of their broader consequences. For example, if your doctor told you that they could give your dying family member 20 more years of healthy life, it would be nearly impossible to say no. But if we offered this extension to every dying person, the consequences for our society would be enormous. They'd be insupportable. The leap from an individual case to a general policy can be enormous. With my IRB experiences in mind, I'd like to offer a few more ethical questions raised by biotechnology and transhumanism that we'll want to consider. First, these technologies offer new temptations for us to create categories of less desirable humans, based on our growing ability to fix them. For example, if we feel an obligation to choose only the embryos that will grow up to be the healthiest children, does that mean that we would be willing to eliminate all embryos with Down syndrome? If we feel obligated to repair an embryo that has inherited a genetic disease, are we defining people with that disease as something to be eliminated? Historically, we've used the concept of personhood to guarantee every individual certain rights and protect them from threats. But we also know how easy it is to classify one group as less human than others. This is why it's so important that we uphold the inherent worth and dignity of every person, because our humanity is something that does not have to be earned and cannot be revoked. The second question that comes to mind is, if our entire society stands to benefit from a particular medical procedure, can we make that compulsory? This is a particular fear for people with inheritable disabilities, who have in some societies been classified as less valuable or less desirable citizens. The history of eugenics is a chilling reminder of how our concern for perfecting humanity can lead to the elimination of imperfect humans. Again, because we still remember the most flagrant medical abuses, I'm less worried about forced euthanasia or sterilization. In the modern consumerist economy, we rely instead on social and economic pressure to make people conform. I regularly show my history of science classes the 1997 science fiction movie Gattaca, depicting a society in the near future where genetic testing predicts a newborn's chances of developing imperfections, and the people are genetically divided into a ruling class and an underclass. My third concern is that the latest medical advances are typically within the reach of only the wealthy. In our IRB cases, we watched closely for research protocols in which people were tempted to serve as human subjects for a monetary reward, to produce a technology that would be too expensive for general use. One of our guiding principles is that the risks and benefits of experimentation has to be shared equally for all of society. In a similar concern, transhumanism critic Kalle Lasson believes that modern technological developments inevitably serve the interests of corporations rather than individuals, society, or the environment. How do we make sure that it's not the wrong values that are guiding the development of biotechnology? Lastly, I want to address the claim that biological improvements to humanity also deprive us of the struggles that actually make us human. Environmental ethicist Bill McKibben suggests that humans are created partly by our limitations and struggles, and he worries that the elimination of imperfection is also the end of life that is free and meaningful. He writes, "The person left without any choice at all is the one that you've engineered. You've decided once and for all certain things about him. He'll have genes expressing proteins to alter his mood. He'll have genes expressing proteins to boost his memory, to shape his stature, and so on. Down that path lies the death of what we call human meaning. The idea that people are in some way their own human beings and not pre-programmed semi-robots." Others, however, reject McKibben's romanticized view of struggle as some noble source of character and suggest that not all changes to the meaning of humanity need to be for the worse. There's no question that biotechnology will certainly change what it means to be human in the future. Perhaps the question we need to ask is, will we continue to respect the inherent worth and dignity of every person with the creation of even more unequal classes of humanity? The growing options for the technological modification of humans offers new challenges to our traditional system of values and our habitual ways of answering ethical questions. Rather than relying on ancient moral codes without question, I look to the Unitarian Universalist tradition of evolving our values as our circumstances evolve. As the very meaning of personhood and humanity changes, the world will very much need our example of open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands to build a future in which we all have a place at the table. May it be so. And now I'd like to invite you into the conversation. This was a topic